So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual event, How We Learn, a conversation with learning designers. My name is Caroline White, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. Just before we get started with introductions from our panelists, a few quick notes about the program and about Science Gallery, if this is your first time joining us. So Science Gallery Detroit is an initiative of Michigan State University and part of an international network dedicated to public engagement with science and art. Science Gallery Detroit works with young adults to ignite creativity and discovery at the intersections of science, technology, art, and design. And so this virtual program is part of the East Lansing edition of our exhibition, Future Present, Design in a Time of Urgency, which is currently hosted at the Broad Art Lab until April 11th. And so you can find out more information about that and about our other virtual programs at detroit.sciencegallery.com. So before we begin, I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Michigan State University Federal Credit Union and the Science Sandbox, for making some of our work possible. So tonight we're going to be talking about the field of learning experience design, which is one of my personal passions. I work as the Education and Learning Manager for Science Gallery Detroit, as well as a learning experience designer for MSU's Hub for Innovation in Learning and Technology. And so tonight I'm joined by three of my wonderful colleagues, Sarah, Darren, and Jeff, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. Last logistic note for those of you that are joining in, we'd love to hear the questions that you have for us. And so the Q&A panel is open and located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So as we're talking and as you have questions that emerge, please submit them there, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So all of that said, Darren, do you want to just start us off with a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. My name is Darren Hood. I am a member of the Hub. As Caroline mentioned, I'm a senior learning experience designer there. In addition to that, I am also a professor at Kent State University, where I teach the entire curriculum for the User Experience Design Master's Program. I'm also a big podcaster, and I speak a lot at conferences all over the world. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of my introduction tonight.
Perfect. Thank you, Darren. Sarah, do you want to go next?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Caroline. Sarah Gretter. I am the Associate Director at the Hub for Innovation in Learning and Technology at Michigan State University. And my background is in educational technology and educational psychology.
Thank you, Sarah. Then Jeff.
Thank you, Caroline. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Grable. I'm the Associate Provost for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Michigan State. I also direct the Hub for Innovation in Learning and Technology, and I've been a faculty member at Michigan State for 19 years and teach rhetoric, writing, and community-based research when I'm not doing what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And so design of learning experiences is something that I've been involved with without really knowing what it was and precisely what the language has been for about 25 years. So the long way of saying I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
As I think we all are. All right, well, thank you three for joining us tonight. So to get us started, I think the place to begin is really, what is learning experience design and some of the history behind it? And maybe Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I would love to. So I'll share with you what my definition of learning experience design is. And like Jeff said, a lot of us are working in this field without knowing it. And so it brings a lot of different domains together. So obviously we focus on learning, right, within learning experience design. For that, we rely on scientific disciplines that tell us how people learn, because we need to understand how human cognition works in order to teach accordingly. And that's because we want learning experiences to be truly transformative for students. We also focus on the human aspect of experiences. That's the experience within learning experience design. And it's common for designers to put people at the heart of their designs because we want to offer learning experiences that students can really relate to and that really works for them. And finally, obviously, it also focuses on design. We use design knowledge from industries that create services or products so that we can really understand what enhances an interaction through practical and appealing features because we want learning experiences to be functional and beautiful at the same time.
Thank you, Sarah. Darren, Jeff, anything to add on to that?
Go ahead, Darren.
Sure. Yeah, I love what Sarah said. I'm gonna piggyback on that and add something to it, because one of the things I sort of wanted to go with my Reader's Digest version of my intro, because I figured some other things would come out as we go forward. So I'm going to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about my background, because I've been working in user experience, known as UX, designed my first website in '95. And just like everybody was just saying that we're dabbling in LX, not knowing, I did the same thing when I first got into UX. And so I was doing a lot of things that we came to know as user experience over the first few years, and then eventually got involved full time. And what I came to learn is that there's user experience, which usually focuses on how someone is engaging with a product, with a service, with a website, with an application, a mobile app or something of that sort, your smart refrigerator, whatever it might be. User experience usually focuses on somebody engaging with a specific resource or solution or service or an item, if you will. So there's user experience over here. Then there's something called customer experience, or CX, which I like to say that it bookends user experience. So UX is focusing on, for example, somebody using this website, whereas CX focuses on the introduction of the brand, goes through that whole UX lifecycle, and then on the end, it covers the customer service, and then funneling people, helping people back to the purchasing funnel. So CX bookends UX. LX, I like to, when I'm talking about LX to people, I like to say that it does the same exact thing. Whereas instructional design, which is how I got into UX actually full-time, that focuses on the course and trying to make sure that the course is designed properly and that the student is going to learn those key skills, the develop their knowledge, build their acumen. The course is focused on helping the learner to get those skills and to develop that way. LX, just like CX bookends UX, LX bookends instructional design, because it's just focused on the course, where LX branches outside of that and it bookends LX the same way. And it focuses not just on what's happening in the classroom, but it may focus on admissions. It may focus on, we've been talking lately around some of the projects around the wellness, how our students, what are their perceptions about wellness that are there? We're concerned about things like that. We want to know how things are going at the residence hall. Does somebody feel like they're a part of the campus, or do they feel estranged? We're going well beyond that standard basic classroom experience that people tend to sort of stereotype and focus on. We're going well beyond that. And we want that entire holistic experience to be something that'll be memorable, something that's going to be beneficial, the same way that CX focuses on a holistic engagement with a brand. So we focus on the holistic engagement with the learners, with the brand, just like CX does. And we want to generate those same touch point oriented, warm fuzzies, I like to call them, across the board. So that's how I see LX.
But just to add a little bit to that, not much to add to what Sarah and Darren provided. They covered quite a landscape. I think if I think about the hub and I think about the work that we've done at Michigan State in this domain intellectually, the focus on experiences, I think the contribution we've made to higher education so far. And we're not the first people to come up with these ideas, but being first is, usually not the most important thing in the world. What I think we've done is created the most fully elaborated group inside higher education committed to the experience as a meaningful unit of analysis or meaningful unit of education, which means, as Darren and Sarah were talking about, courses are embedded and inclusive in the experience, but the experience is an expansive notion. And so we see a university education as a collection or articulation of experiences, and all of them can be more or less designed, and many of them contribute to learning, but aren't really part of the design work of an institution. Students in a residential experience, for example, spend most of their time outside of the classroom. And as one of my favorite students said to me 20 years ago, she said to me, look, Jeff, she says, if it was just about taking classes, I would have left a long time ago. I'm here for everything outside of the classes. And she was a super smart student. And that was probably the first time I started to think about the collection of experiences that a residential or any university, but particularly a residential campus provides to people, and the way in which they might be more powerful and transformative for students if we were more intentional about their design. So I think the hub is a little ahead of the rest of higher education in this regard. And I think people will catch up to us eventually. But I think this is the most powerful idea in our toolkit, the notion that the experience is what matters, that we can understand the experience, we can draw some boundaries around it, and we can be intentional about its design.
Thank you, Jeff. That makes me think, I mean, to the point of around thinking about the experiences more comprehensively as a whole, one of the quotes that I actually really like from Just Not To is that it says, there are many instructional design frameworks that inform the way content is delivered, and those are important, but LX pushes further, making sure the student voice is integrated more purposefully by sharing the course development and iteration process with those for whom it's designed. And I think that's what we talk about a lot when we talk about LX, is making sure students are co-designers with us, and it's not just designing experiences for them. That's probably a good segue into kind of the next question. And Darren, you touched on this a little bit, but to unpack it a little bit more, a couple years ago, a colleague and I did a presentation at the Online Learning Consortium conference around the role of an instructional designer. And one of the things that came up as we talked to different colleagues across the universities was that role could be more course focused, or it could be more of what we currently describe as a learning experience designer. So what would you say are some of the similarities and differences between instructional design and learning experience design? Darren, I see you
I'm
wanting to go first.
I keep wanting to defer. Okay. So instructional design, as mentioned, it's about, I think about my old days as an instructional designer. We would get a project presented to us, and we would begin conducting needs analyses. And we find out, what is it that we actually need to accomplish? What does this course need to deliver? What should students walk away with? What should they be confident about? And so we do all the discovery, and we find out what that was about. Then after we found out what that was about, we go into task analysis, because we associated tasks with the needs, and we find out what the tasks are, and we start to, that lays the foundation of the coursework. Long story short, we end up putting together this course with we've got our modules all put together, and everything is set, and we finally get the okay, and we vet things out, and we roll out the course. The work of the instructional designer, feedback also included in that. We want to find out, we want to confirm with students whether or not this was a good learning experience for them, and where they think we need to make improvements, things of that nature. But after that, the work of the instructional designer, me in that day and time, I was done. I moved on to the next course, or either a new course or modifying that one. Again, the LX designer, our focus is so much broader. There are a lot of things that we even do as LX designers that don't have anything to do with courses at all. There's a lot of, it's possible to, over the course of a year, to not touch a single solitary course. But at the same time, I love what Jeff said, that student that said, if I was here for the courses, I would have been gone a long time ago. People get immersed. It's like the work environment. People, a lot of times, they go through their hardships with their regular everyday job, but they stay because they love their boss. They stay because of the culture. They stay because of the amenities, those things that keep the wind in their sails. And for the learners, for the students, it's the same way. So we need to pay attention to, I love also how Caroline mentioned how that getting that student voice, We need to understand what they have to say. We need to understand what their sentiments are. We need to understand how they feel about the learning experience as a whole. What is it that made you feel like you're really a Spartan? What gave you a sense of ownership? Because you're not just going to stay here just for that class. I graduated from Syracuse, and one of the reasons I went to Syracuse because I not only want to get a good learning experience, but I'm paying money so that I can have the bragging right of say that I went to Syracuse. There's something associated with that institution that goes well beyond what happens in that classroom. And we want to be able to find out what those things are, get those details, get that data, and help that drive what it is that we're doing. So again, we can confirm, not because we think it's what they want or need to do, but because we've confirmed it, we've vetted it out with students, we've validated things, and we know that we want to provide a very strong academic experience. So we're going to work with instructional designers when it's appropriate and when we need to partner and collaborate. But we also want to make sure that all these other things that normally go unattended and that a lot of people take for granted, and we want to make sure that we are purposefully engaging to make sure that the learning experience is complete, not just the course, not just the courses. They can go to another school and get the courses a lot of times.
Right.
But through that experience as a whole, that holistic experience, we can drive something far greater. And that's the stuff that they remember for the rest of their lives.
And what that means on the learning experience design aspect of things, or the learning experience designer, are a set of skills that go beyond the instructional designer, in the sense that that makes us responsible. And we've observed this over the years. It makes us needing to understand the university as a system. It makes us needing to understand basics of change management and relationship building with the different stakeholders. So we're taking much more of a holistic picture of learning, like Darren just said, but also of the learning institution as such, so that we can operate within that system in order to infer changes and transformation and innovation in certain cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeff, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but as we noted at the beginning, all of us work for the Hub. So Jeff and Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about what the Hub is and what role it's played around learning design work on campus?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Jeff. So
Are you sure?
I thought you were starting. I was ready. So the Hub for Innovation in Learning and Technology at Michigan State University functions in a way as an internal design consultancy, if you will, which means that we are consultants for campus, and we work on a range of projects that includes wide projects that are campus-wide or large-scale campus projects. And the range in our portfolio is broad. Obviously, within the past year, we've focused a lot on online learning and helping campus get to where it needed to get. But our project ranged from redesigning curriculum, and that could be veterinary medicine or math reform, to designing new learning opportunities for students, which includes things like the iOS Design Lab on campus, and just new co-curricular experiences across the board. Jeff, would you like to continue this description?
No, you did a great job. That was a test, Sarah, to see if you could pass. You got an A-. That was pretty good. No, I mean, Sarah did a really nice job. I mean, we're really chartered to be an innovation group, and to focus on projects that could transform the university into the learning institution it needs to be for the near future. Now, I want to be a little bit modest about that. I mean, no single project and no single group does that. And so really it's a matter of what is the aggregate impact of a portfolio of efforts that have the characteristics of working at a certain level of scale at the institution. So the program or the curriculum or the experience and above. And so as Sarah noted, we've worked with departments and units, and we've worked with offices that have cross-campus scale. And as people have found us, and as people have understood who we are and what we do, they have also found ways to leverage the capacity of the hub to get work done that seemed impossible to them prior to the hub. And that's been one of the most gratifying experiences to work with partners who've said, you know, we've wanted to do this for a long time and we really didn't know how to do it. Because of you and because of the capacity that you have, we've now been able to imagine and execute something that seemed impossible to us. Let me say one more thing about the hub, which is, I don't know how often I've talked about this, but it's more important to me that the hub be a resource for faculty and students than it be a resource for administrators and leaders. This gets me in trouble when I say it out loud, so I don't say it out loud too terribly much. But one of the originating ideas was to create a cultural and intellectual space for people to create and invent outside of the silos and structures and architecture of hierarchy in the institution. And so one of the things that's really difficult, there's two tensions that we have to navigate, and they're difficult tensions. One is the tension between service and innovation. That is, the more that we get called to do service, the less we're capable of innovating. And service can overwhelm new things and innovation. And we get a lot of pressure to do service. So we have to navigate that tension. And the other tension is frankly, between the wishes and desires of faculty and the wishes and desires of the institution. And so faculty frequently come to us with really lovely ideas that, in fact, I had a conversation this week with a faculty member with a really lovely idea that she can't bring to anybody in the leadership in her unit because it'll die immediately. So then the question is, do we help her with this really lovely idea? And the answer is, of course we do. And then we figure out how to make it live a little bit later. So those two tensions are really difficult tensions, and they're tensions for any internal innovation group like ours. And they're irresolvable. We just sort of have to manage them on a day-to-day and a project-to-project basis, which frustrates the living daylights out of almost everybody who works in the hub, but is frankly the reality of an organization like the hub.
And for us to be able to achieve and execute on our projects, then we have to keep in mind that North Star of us, which is, does it matter for the experience of students? And that's really what drives our work and the decisions we make on different projects.
Yeah, the mattering to students is huge. And I think just thinking of the projects that I've worked on that I've enjoyed the most too, like some of the most meaningful, to your earlier point, Sarah, around change management work is to facilitate some of those conversations with students throughout the design process, and to see faculty and project collaborators' faces light up when they hear these student stories and kind of engage them in that active design process. And I think that's always been something extraordinarily rewarding for me.
Yeah, so the students, I'm going to make Sarah tell a story in a minute. The notion of the power of students and the inclusion of students in this design work is, for us, obvious, but it's exceptionally difficult to include students in the design of their own learning experiences. This is insane to actually say out loud. Sarah and I had a conversation with the Gates Foundation today about this very issue, about how difficult it is to be inclusive of students in design practices, but how fundamental it is to equitable design in higher education. So I want to underline the obviousness of this and the difficulty of it. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to tell the story about how the inclusion of students in the first and second year experience design project changed the project.
Yeah, no, and you're completely right. First of all, we're one of the only industries, if you will, or businesses that has the luck and the benefit and advantage of having our students right there, right? Our customers, quote unquote, are right there around us all the time, yet it's so difficult to get them in the room. Sometimes I even mention it as the S word, right? Students, like almost as if it's a taboo word, but once we include students in the conversation, things completely change. And Darren and Caroline can attest to that, because we're working on the first year and second year student experience project, which aims at redesigning and rethinking what the first 2 years on campus or off campus look like for students. And for that purpose, we've included 3 different students in our first ideation and iteration of the project. And having students at the table, around the table, and talking about their experiences and how they've experienced MSU, in our case, Michigan State University, and the programming that we've put in place for them has changed the tone of the project completely, because we're not thinking about it from the institution's perspective, we're thinking about it from the student's perspective and their experience of that programming. And that's changed the project drastically in terms of looking at it from our actual students.
Sarah, to build on that, we have a question in the Q&A too of, can you share a couple of examples of projects that you've done with the Hub? So what are some examples of other work? And Jeff and Darren, you can add on to that one too.
Jeff, which are projects you would like to highlight? We've got quite a large portfolio right now.
Why don't you talk about something as simple but as effective as the French project, and something as nudgy and edgy as the iOS Design Lab, as 2, I think, bookend.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good frame. So 2 examples. One small example that actually has a lot of impact is the French program. So we were approached by the French department a couple of years ago. They were stuck a little bit in an admin transition for their program. They wanted to redesign their masters and their PhDs, and that meant rethinking about their courses, rethinking about their goals and purposes. So we did a very short series of small sprints. We call them sprints because they're really dedicated short amount of times where we talk about specific ideas, and those are modeled after Google Ventures methodology for those problem-solving solutions. And so we spent 3 very focused design conversations with them. And out of those 3 conversations, they actually managed to get their masters and PhDs approved by the university, redesigned and complete with new ideas. So huge impact for students, huge impact for that faculty. And this was really a result of us managing and helping them look at that solution space and that problem space in a different way. A larger example is the iOS Design Lab. Thank you, Jeff, for this example. This was what Jeff calls a small bet, a new learning opportunity for students on campus. We started this about 3 years ago. The idea was to bring design, coding, and entrepreneurship together in a learning opportunity, a learning experience for students on campus. So undergrads from different majors all across campus. And we had this intellectual partnership started with Apple in order to create that opportunity. That small bet has provided 3 years worth of new learning experiences for students who have, we have stories from students who have either added a minor to their majors or went into a different type of master's for their graduate experience based on their lived experiences in the lab. But we also, out of this experience, got to launch the first Apple Academy that it lives in Detroit right now. And that's the first one in the United States. So lots of experiences, lots of community partnerships out of this. And so we either redesign or design things that exist on campus in order to get to the student experience and really improve student success.
So slight shift in direction, but this both connects to one of the questions we have in the Q&A, along with, I think it's, especially these days, it's tough to talk about learning experience design without also talking about the impact of COVID. So that has had obviously a significant impact on education at every single level we can imagine. And there's been a lot of people, like both at Michigan State and just across all institutions, working really, really hard to try to develop really quality learning experiences in a really difficult situation. And so given that, how have you all seen the conversation around learning design and learning in general changing over the past year? And in particular, how has that shift to remote learning changed the way that universities consider work with learning experience and instructional designers?
Well, let me take an MSU-centric stab at a part of this answer. The pandemic has impacted us absolutely, as it's impacted everybody. And so it's changed quite dramatically what we've worked on and how we've worked. On the positive side, for the first time in my 19 years at Michigan State, we have a lot of people on campus suddenly interested in teaching and learning and in design. And so we've had some real opportunities in that regard to engage with people and at a scale that hasn't been available to us in our very short life. This is fundamentally our 4th full year in operation. So we're still kids. The other hand, there isn't a whole lot of interest in design per se, right? So because of the pandemic, we've had more opportunities to engage in more conversations that we hope to extend over time. On the other hand, they've mostly been triage in nature. So we've mostly been putting out fires and solving problems. And that's not really design work, not in the timescales and in the context that we've been able to do it. So it's been a mixed bag of both opportunity and constraint in terms of what we've been able to do because of the pandemic. But there'll be more online and hybrid instruction at MSU post-pandemic than there's ever been. And there's a real need and I think an emerging desire to be guided by expertise in how we create those learning experiences.
I would say that on my end, the opportunity that we've seen in that space, despite all the challenges that we've been facing, both students, faculty, staff, and just communities in general, has been the ability for us to focus on subjects that really matter to us in terms of design. So accessibility, those topics like Darren mentioned, student wellness and the things that go beyond just the course instruction and the course design, but really to think about the student experience overall and making sure that students felt supported, that courses were accessible, and that we were thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond just the course platform. So that's been a good space of opportunities for us to discuss those design principles beyond just the partners that we have, but with campus in general.
That question also reminds me of the previous question. I think I can sort of touch on the two, not just coursework, but we're currently working on, I think it's okay to talk about this because it's going on right now, but the Alumni Distributed Scholarship Program is an annual competition that takes place, and 66th year for the competition. It's usually done in person. Well, because of COVID and because of the desire and the drive to still have that competition, it's now virtual. And so we had to set up a website. We already had access to a virtual fair resource, but we actually set up the whole fair so it's virtual. People can watch, they can attend live presentations, they can engage with faculty and with students, they can ask all types of questions, they can deep dive any part of the school, any specialization that's presented at MSU. That information is available for people through the virtual fair. And so we had to set up a website. We had to make sure the virtual fair was structured properly. And this weekend, actually, they're in the process now. A lot of students are going through practice examinations and they're tapping into the content, and they'll be taking their first exams this week. So because of COVID, we had to take that entire initiative, make it virtual, and it looks like it's going to be a huge success. There's somewhere in the vicinity of 1,300 students that will be registered. There were, I think, 1,100 that were registered as of this morning, and so we're hoping to get to that target number here by sometime in the morning. But complete shift because of COVID.
Okay. So looking at the Q&A, the next question, which relates a little bit to, I think, what you touched on earlier, Sarah, is what criteria allow you to assess if you are actually engaged in innovative practices in the realm of learning experience design?
That's an awesome question. When I really liked it when I read it. So that's a conversation I often have with both partners and just colleagues in general. But when we talk about innovation, often people think of inventions. And so what people imagine we do is invent new technologies, that we deal with artificial intelligence and really cool stuff like this. But innovation, unfortunately, does not always take that shape. And innovation can simply be having a conversation that had never happened, or designing a conversation that allows people in different silos to be in the same room. So for us, any of those criteria help us assess whether or not we are innovating or we're helping innovation. Sometimes our role is facilitating those conversations, and that is part of the work that we do. I always compare the hub, our unit, to the hub of a car, right? The hub is what connects the axis to the wheels, and it gets things going. And that's kind of how I personally assess the work that we do. Is if we've helped things to move and towards change or transformation, then it's a marker of success for us.
I think that's a good answer, Sarah. I want to build on that a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we don't do is look at the ideas that our colleagues bring us and say, well, that's not particularly innovative. We're not going to work on that. That's not really a criterion. We really focus on a project or an effort that is likely to be a sustainable and meaningful change in practice that will enhance the student experience or make the university a better educational institution. So the criteria can get a little bit more granular from there, but that's usually the heuristic that we use to decide where we invest our dollars and where we might not invest our dollars, given that we have the choice to say no, which isn't always the case. So it's not really a function of creativity or gee whiz or anything like that. It's really about transformation that will benefit students. And that's really important because it's kind of mundane. I mean, one of the things that I've learned I've been working with Apple for 3 years on what have proved to be some pretty remarkable initiatives. And one of the things that I've learned from them is how much they privilege execution. And in other words, the thing that they privilege more, they like new ideas, they like creative ideas, they like lovely ideas, but they think ideas are relatively cheap. And creativity is also relatively cheap. I think it's a little bit more expensive than maybe they sometimes think it is. I think they dwell with a bunch of really creative people. What they really value, though, is execution. And so the old saw that, a great idea is just a great idea. It doesn't mean anything unless you can execute. That's where they see innovation happening, and the innovation for Apple is in execution. And so we began the hub with a heavy predisposition towards shipping product and execution, and that was the right thing to begin with, and I'm glad we started there. But that has been reinforced more over the last 4 years. So one of the criterion that I would add to this notion of what's innovative is executable. Did the idea get executed? Did the team execute? If the team executed, pretty innovative team.
So I'm going to bridge two of the questions that have a similar theme within our Q&A. So as someone pointed out, we've been talking a lot about the hub specifically in parallel to learning experience design. And obviously kind of the hub is unique to MSU as an institution. So given that, how can kind of the conversation around learning experience design for educators and curriculum designers that don't have something like a hub, what benefits are there for educators and curriculum designers not affiliated with MSU? And then kind of the parallel question to that is really, how do you see LX either already being applied or could be applied to industries outside of the university systems, both formal and informal education environments?
So let me take a quick stab at a very sort of Jeff answer to those questions. I appreciate the questions. I've been waiting to get to this. So So sort of two, let me fork this and try to be brief. You know, pre-pandemic, the hub, we were starting to become more of a resource for people in the state of Michigan interested in these issues. And the pandemic has just taken up all of our excess capacity to think. And what I mean by that is pre-pandemic, routinely, monthly, people from other universities and K-12 districts in the state of Michigan would come visit with us. And for brief consultations, sometimes we've done some work with K-12 districts in which we've partnered with them on helping them lead some work inside their own districts, which is parallel to the hub. And so we're very much interested in being a resource to our colleagues elsewhere in the state of Michigan. Today, we had a conversation with people about what might that look like, you know, more broadly. So we don't intend to be a private little boutique resource to just to Michigan State. I appreciate the question. I think it's an incisive question. Frankly, I think we just as human beings need to get a little bit beyond the pandemic before we can re-engage with that kind of work. But we certainly want to be a resource for others to think, because we learn from it, right? So so we want to not be exclusive to Michigan State in terms of what we have to offer and how we can engage and work with people. Let me sort of pivot to a second part of that answer. And let me talk about Science Gallery for a second. I fell in love with Science Gallery because I thought it was a completely radical, transformative, designed experience. So here's what I mean by that. I love cultural institutions. So whenever I travel, I go to museums, I go to theater, I go constantly. And when I first time I went to Science Gallery, I thought this is the weirdest, most interesting, most compelling designed informal learning experience I've ever seen. First, there were the mediators, who were these remarkable human beings, Trinity College students in my first experience, our own students and in Science Gallery Detroit's experiences, who engaged me in conversations that were more fun and more compelling and more engaging than anything I'd ever experienced in a cultural institution like a museum or a gallery or a theater. And then the way in which the objects were intentionally under-constructed, underbuilt, put in relationship to each other was also unlike anything I had ever seen before in a cultural institution. So it was accessible, it was fun, it was engaging. The combination of the human beings and the way in which the objects were arrayed and sequenced and used by people was honestly an experience that blew my mind. And I think this is still the transformative, future-facing, really remarkable potential of Science Gallery. It's a designed experience, and it's the most intentionally designed informal learning experience I've ever seen. Meow Wolf is probably, if you ever have a chance to get out to Meow Wolf, that will blow your mind. But there are relatively few examples of that. And so when we talk about the application of learning design outside of formal learning institutions, I think there's broad applicability and broad design. And when I look at who has recruited Science Gallery Dublin people away from Science Gallery and who recruits people from the hub to leave the hub and work for them, a lot of private sector employers are coming to really well-designed informal learning experience organizations because they have applicability, and Darren knows this, they have applicability into other parts of the economy. So hopefully that wasn't too bifurcated and too rambly, but hopefully that also begins to address at least the questions.
I think hearing Jeff talk about that, it makes me think about my example earlier about CX work, that it's basically parallel. What we do for the institution from an LX perspective, a lot of people are already doing from a CX perspective. That and there's another avenue of it where I was talking to somebody a week ago, basically focusing on employee wellness and things that they want to do to make sure that the employees that they're feeling okay about the organization, that they're feeling valued. There's a lot of parallels, even from the employee perspective, not just the customers, but looking at your employees as customers. There are people out there that are doing work that are just like that can really transform the business. I mean, can you imagine how much money a company saves by reducing attrition? how much knowledge is maintained in an organization because people are not leaving and taking that knowledge elsewhere and helping others to grow. There's a lot of impact that can be made. So whether it's the standard, the traditional CX approach, or just looking at the employees as customers in a sense, and then putting those same efforts to work with employees, there's a lot of transformation that can be made, a lot of benefits that can be gained by investing in such things, in that type of work.
Agreed, and I think that has ramifications beyond higher ed and just learning environments in general. And one of the things that we've noticed in the past, like Jeff said, obviously the pandemic has taken a lot of our time and capacity, but even previously, what people who came to us were interested in not only the learning experience design, but also the methodology we use and how they can translate or transfer to their own industries, whether it's the design thinking models that we use, or just the techniques for brainstorming and innovation in general. Those transfer really well to other industries.
So building off of that and kind of focusing on the methodology of learning experience design, are there books or websites that you feel are exemplary in their practice or applied explanation of learning experience design?
Man, and Sarah and Darren, you've got two superstars. That you guys have the bibliography. You have to plug our book though, Sarah.
I was going to say, you first have to highlight our book.
I can't remember the title, so you have to.
So yes, the answer is yes. I'll share mine first. So first of all, we have a book coming out in the fall of 2021. So stay tuned for that, called Design for Change in Higher Education. And that goes over the methodologies, the philosophy, and the techniques that we've used in the Hub specifically, but in the learning experience design world that we've created around us over the past few years. So stay tuned for that. This is the playbook. Other than that, I would say that my bibliographies are really focused on those three areas: learning. So I have a lot of cognitive science and just learning sciences in general in terms of books. Experiences, a little bit on experience design, and then design in general. And that actually is not a lot of books, a lot of blogs, and a lot of online resources. We'll make sure to have those together for you, Caroline, to share back.
The PLN for me revolves mostly around experience design, as Sarah mentioned, as a whole, because I think that experience design in general is a very pervasive discipline. That whether it's LX, and I there's something I call the experience landscape, where we have all the X's. We've got the CX, which is the more overarching and more of has a longer history. You've got UX, which I mentioned. There is LX, of course, and then there's the BX, which is an automatically generated. We can call it a perception, if you will, with BX. That is actually, I always tell people that UX plus CX equals BX. If you bring LX into it, then LX plus UX equals BX. And the perception that people have, the way that BX works, is that the way that the perception, again, that someone has of an organization is going to be based on what efforts an organization put into their UX, put into their CX, put into their LX. And so you ask somebody, they won't tell you, well, my BX is this. They just tell you their sentiments, the tweets that are out there, the feedback that you see when you look at something on Amazon about a particular book. Every little institution, every product, every service, there's a BX. Everything is traced back to that brand. And so for me, experience design, this broad picture, I have a huge PLN, a personalized learning network, that helps me to learn as much as I can about experience design as a whole. And I actually started talking about, I found an old presentation actually last week. The first time that I talked about LX in public space was in 2014. And I had actually started talking about it in general the year prior to that. And so it all goes back to everything I've ever learned, because everything I've ever learned about experience design plays a role on the LX side. There is one website that I can mention, lxd.org, which is a place that I can go and just find some things to maybe sort of help me to brainstorm a little bit and maybe give me some ideas about such. But outside of that, for me, it's just been general experience design. Anything related to experience design, I can run it back to and make it relevant to what we're doing on the LX side of things.
Perfect. And this is a good segue into what is probably one of my favorite questions, because I think, as we mentioned earlier, both for learning experience designers, it's often a stumble upon career path. It's not necessarily one that you set out for. And so if someone wants to explore this as a career shift or as an add-on to their skill sets, what are some of the steps you suggest they take? And along with that, maybe Sarah, Darren, and I can certainly add to this as well. You could talk a little bit about your kind of pathway into this space too.
I'd like to start this one off just to get my simple part out of the way, and we'll let the big LX vets address the other part. It reminds me of the early days of UX. Nobody could say, I mean, it wasn't called UX broadly until the mid 2000s, until like somewhere between 2005 to 2007, even though Don Norman had the title back in 93, 94 back there, but it didn't get adopted discipline wide until much later. None of us set out to be UX people. Not a single solid, not even Don Norman set out to be a UX professional. He stumbled across it. I stumbled across it. It was something that people just did. Today, it's a choice. Today, you might be able to find a program and study it at school. But when you compare LX and its life cycle, or I'm sorry, UX and its life cycle to LX and its life cycle, it's pretty much the same. It's a lot of people are going to stumble into it. They're going to see it, they're going to learn about it and go, you know what? I think that I might like to look into that a little further. It's just like it was with UX. So it's in its early stages, just like, and when UX was in its early stages, we were all stumblers. So consider it a blessing if you stumble across it for now.
I agree. I stumbled upon it as the associate provost for teaching learning and technology at MSU reached out so that we could talk about some of those experiences and my background in particular. So with EdTech and EdPsych, I knew that what was missing for me was that big picture, that I was interested in learning and I was interested in learning experiences. There was no label for it, but I knew that I was interested in the bigger systems picture. And that's what really was missing. And that's what I found in learning experience design. And obviously stumbling across the hub particularly and Jeff to help guide kind of that career path. I blame it on you, Jeff.
Yeah, mine was pretty similar. I actually made it until my, oh gosh, I think it was my last year of undergrad. And I had loved UX design and I had loved education. And it wasn't until I started interning actually at the hub where I realized that that was a career path you could do. And so I guess kind of my recommendations for someone who's interested in exploring it further is to, as Darren and Sarah have kind of mentioned, is to really dive into both the learning sciences, the user experience design. There's a ton of, I think, I know OLC has like an instructional designer certification, which is a little bit different, but gets you kind of some of the background and skill sets there. And so I think there's a lot of small ways kind of organically on your own, also outside of formal education spaces that can really kind of help you just develop those skill sets. All right, and to close us out on one final question, what advice would you give, particularly to someone who's just kind of starting or exploring their career in learning experience design, what's one piece of advice you would give someone who wants to pursue that as a pathway?
I like what Sarah said. I see her wheels turning, so I'll help her and she can keep her wheels turning. I'll just throw this out there. I think that learning about instructional design is a fantastic foundation, because it's important to understand that that core element. If you want to look at learning experience design, is it going to be holistic? Yes, it is. But to understand that it still has the student, the direct learning part of it, the academic part of it is still the core. And so in UX, a lot of people are starting too broadly and they're missing the core elements, what I call the 4 pillars of UX. They miss it and they end up having to double back. If you want to learn about LX now, it is critically important that you understand the instructional design part of it. So at least you have the core will be in place, and then you can branch out and learn all the other things. You'll have a more stable journey, in my opinion, if you do that, instead of rushing and then getting on the outskirts and never understanding the core. You'll never be able to interact with some of the people that are at the base of what you're working with. If you don't understand what's going on course wise, you won't understand what's going on with the people who are the faculty members and the people who are driving that base part of the learning experience, and you'll struggle. So learn instructional design. You can get a certificate in it. I have a grad cert in educational technology from MSU myself, and that was on top of several other certifications. And those things helped make me what I am today regarding it. I do think that if I didn't understand that part of that piece of the puzzle, then it would actually have kept me from being the asset that I could be today. So I highly recommend that.
Sarah, Jeff, anything to add?
I think that was a pretty darn good answer.
That was a really good answer. I would say stay curious about human beings, particularly. That's at the center of everything we do, and particularly now where we're all, sitting in our chairs at home. Just remember and just think about the human beings behind the learning, behind the experience, and that helps drive a lot of the work that you might be interested in doing.
All right. And that was perfect timing. I was going to say, Sarah closed like right on the 7:30 note.
Cut.
So thank you everyone for joining us. I had a couple people ask about contact information, so I dropped that in the chat. You can also find our contact information on the Hub's website, which is hub.msu.edu. So there's ways to get a hold of us there as well if you have further questions. And with that, I guess I'll just close us out with a couple final thank yous. So obviously to you, Sarah, Darren, and Jeff for taking the time to have this conversation. It's always a pleasure to talk with each other, particularly around learning design. Thank you again to MSU FCU and Science Sandbox for their support of Science Gallery's work. And then finally, thank you to the audience for spending part of your Thursday evening with us and for asking really wonderful questions. Again, if you're interested in learning more about Science Gallery Detroit, the exhibitions and programs, you can head over to detroit.sciencegallery.com. And other than that, have a wonderful evening, everyone.